Hey y'all, I'm Jerica Brachet and welcome to The Hearth. If you're new here, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Basically, The Hearth is a online communal space that I am trying to cultivate for the seekers, the deep feelers, the meaning makers. It's a space for those of us who are trying to understand life more deeply. We're the ones asking life's biggest questions, and we enjoy exploring and discovering and rediscovering who we are as we journey through this thing called life. So if that resonates with you and that's your vibe, I think you'll like it here. If you're returning, your hearth folk, welcome back. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about existential nihilism. These are some feelings and some emotions that I've been experiencing and exploring and working through over the course of probably like 10 years now, stemming from my faith deconstruction journey, but I've seen it sort of subtly, consistently show up even to present day, and I thought I would discuss that with you guys. So grab you some coffee, get your snacks or tea if you like tea, get your beverage, okay? I'm so ready for fall, y'all. It's not even funny, okay? Today is, I think, August the 1st, and I'm just ready. I'm ready to cozy up with the warm beverages, you feel me? So anyway, get your snack, get what you need, because we're gonna make this a cozy one, and I think you guys are really gonna enjoy this video. Now, as a lover of all things theology and metaphysics, alchemy, philosophy, I've actually found it quite liberating and extremely validating as well to have come across so many philosophers and thought leaders that have spoken about existential nihilism or written about it as I've researched for this video and just in my own personal study. And they do it in such an honest and thorough way. They do not shy away from the ugliness or the really difficult, taboo questions that arise when talking about this topic. And we'll touch on a little bit of that today. I don't recall exactly when I first came across the myth of Sisyphus story, but the symbolism has really stood out to me so much lately, specifically the monotony of pushing the rock uphill, you know, the boulder, only for it to fall back down, and then Sisyphus have to do it over and over again. And that feeling, that experience, that is exactly how life has felt for me the past 2 to 3 years, more strongly. It's been that way for a while, but the past 2 to 3 years really strongly. And from what I'm seeing, like on social media platforms like Threads, where people are also sharing their experiences, I think it's a collective thing at this point. We are all like, what is it all for? But there are some philosophical concepts associated with the story that I definitely resonated with in some capacity, and this is what we're going to explore in today's video. Why does modern life feel so Sisyphean? For those of you not familiar with the myth of Sisyphus, not to worry, I'm gonna summarize it for you. So it's story time. Let's go. Okay, y'all, my bad. I didn't mean to tease you like that. Before we jump into the story of Sisyphus, I do want to differentiate the story of Sisyphus from the myth of Sisyphus. The myth of Sisyphus is a 4-part essay written by Albert Camus in 1942, where he uses the Greek myth, the story of Sisyphus, as a metaphor for the human condition and what he calls the absurd. Camus defines the absurd as the conflict between the human desire for meaning and the universe's or life's silence in response to that desire. So before we get into all that and to make the connection with nihilism and modern life, now I'm gonna go ahead and give you the backstory on the story of Sisyphus. So Sisyphus is a descendant of Prometheus. He is the king of Corinth, and he witnesses Zeus's abduction of Aegina, which is the daughter of the river god Sisyphus, or I think it's Asopus. I think it's pronounced Asopus. Now, having witnessed this, he goes to Asopus, who has been tirelessly looking for his daughter and is highly upset by her sudden disappearance, and he wants to make a deal with him. He offers to reveal what happened to Aegina if, in return, Sisyphus supplies a spring of water to his city, the city of Corinth. Sisyphus agrees, and Sisyphus tells him what happened. Hey, Zeus came, took your daughter, right? This angers Zeus because, of course, you should not be meddling in the affairs of the gods. So much so that he sends Thanatos, which is basically the personification of death, after him, after Sisyphus, to take his life. But Sisyphus is a cunning man, okay? And so when Thanatos arrives, he sweet talks him. He showers him with compliments and presents him with jewelry, you know. He'll no longer need this jewelry, right? Because he's gonna be sent to the underworld once he dies. But Thanatos is pleased by this gesture, okay? He is just eating it up. But it turns out that the cuffs and the necklace placed on Thanatos were actually shackles. So he gets chained, and this allows Sisyphus to escape. Now, as long as death was bound, Thanatos is bound, nobody died, okay? And this angered the gods because that means that sacrifices... I have to laugh. This means that sacrifices could not be made to them because nobody could die. Specifically, Ares, the god of war, was particularly upset and annoyed because his battles had become boring due to the opponents not dying. And so Ares immediately went to Corinth to free Thanatos and, of course, turned Sisyphus over to him. So death took his life, and Sisyphus found himself in the underworld face to face with Hades. He told Hades that his wife in the living world had wronged him by not giving him a proper burial. And so he begged Hades to allow him to go back to the upper world just for one day to get revenge on his wife. And to this, Hades agreed. But when I was about to say syphilis. Oh my God. But when Sisyphus... But when Sisyphus... Why am I struggling to say his name all of a sudden? Oh my God. So when Sisyphus was back in the land of the living, he and his wife fled, and he did not return to the underworld as he had promised Hades that he would do. Sisyphus lived a long life, but eventually death came to collect him as he was dying from old age. And once again, he was sent back to the underworld. But this time, Hades made sure that Sisyphus paid for his crimes against the gods by condemning him to eternally push a massive boulder up a hill, only for it to roll back down each time just as it neared the top. And he had to repeat this futile task in perpetuity. This myth has become a symbol of laborious, futile, and never-ending effort that is often described as Sisyphean tasks in contemporary culture. And I think this is why I can resonate with the symbolism as it relates to the monotony and the mundane of everyday life. For eternity, Sisyphus is condemned to the task of rolling this boulder uphill, knowing that before it even reaches the top, it's going to roll down again. And then he does it again and again and again. He is fully aware and conscious that even if he wanted to do something different or stop pushing this boulder, he can't. That to me feels like being trapped. And that's honestly how I have felt about my own life the past 2 to 3 years. Like I was telling you guys before, it's like being trapped in this cycle that you just can't escape. For me, this is where the symbolism of Sisyphus begins to look so much eerily familiar to modern life. And it goes beyond whether or not Sisyphus can physically continue pushing this boulder, because I think humans willingly all the time do difficult things, especially when we believe that there is some sort of end game or we've attached some sort of meaning that these things matter, right? We endure pregnancy in order to give birth. We train in order to participate in marathons. We care for our loved ones when they're sick so that we can make sure that they are nursed back to health or make sure that they're as comfortable as they could possibly be, right? We spend years studying, building, creating, sacrificing, and working towards something that may not pay off right away. So difficulty in and of itself is not what I think makes something Sisyphean. What makes Sisyphus's punishment so cruel, in my opinion, is that his effort is disconnected from any sort of end game, any sort of meaningful outcome or purpose. He's not pushing the boulder because he's trying to save someone or to build towards something. He's not going to become free once he pushes the boulder a certain amount of times, right? Or once it finally reaches the top, which it never does. There is no moment when he can look at all the work he's done and then say, I'm finished, right? Or that the effort that he's putting in will produce something that will be long lasting or have longevity and remain even once the job is done, something that he can continue to benefit from, right? So he has no agency in what he's doing. He didn't choose the task. He can't decide if he's done enough for the day. He can't negotiate better terms or better conditions. He can't take what he's learned and move on to something else, right? He's forced to give his energy away to a process that offers him no reward, no freedom, and no possibility of completion, ever. This is what I think hits home for myself and so many other people as to why we can sort of see ourselves in Sisyphus's story, or we can recognize our own lives within this myth. You wake up, you go to work, you give 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours of your day to a company or an institution that you most likely, not everybody, right, have no emotional investment in or connection to. You come home exhausted, you still gotta eat, you gotta clean, you gotta take your showers, you gotta care for your spouses or family or pets, parents, right? There's little me time left for yourself, right? Only to have to wake up and do it all over again the next day, right? Over and over and over, day after day, year after year, until you can either afford to retire or die. And not only does this suck, but for some people, the labor put in isn't even fruitful enough, meaning they don't even make enough money to live a life beyond their bare minimum needs getting met. They make just enough to survive, but never enough to thrive. The payoff is never quite enough to become free of the cycle or escape the rat race. This also reminds me of this game that I used to play with my mom, and it was something like that. I think it was called The Rat Race. I'll put it somewhere up here so that you guys can see it. But yeah, it's like you just make enough to continue the cycle. I want to be clear in stating that I do not believe that all work is meaningless or that every repetitive job is meaningless or Sisyphean in nature. The difference is whether there is some kind of connection between your effort and your humanity, right? Do you feel that what you do matters? Do you have any control over how you do it? Can you immediately see who benefits from what you do? Are you compensated enough to enjoy a life outside of the work that you do, right? Does your labor build towards anything, or does it just keep you alive long enough to just continue laboring? In my personal exploration, as well as in the research for this video, I came across a thesis by political philosopher Hannah Arendt, I think is how you say it. It's Arendt. In her book called The Human Condition, where she discusses the 3 elements of what she calls the vita activa, or the active life. In her framework, labor is the activity connected to biological necessity. It is what we must continually do to sustain life, right? We eat, but eventually we become hungry again. We clean, but things become dirty again. I think you get the gist. Labor follows a cyclical rhythm of survival because its products are continuously being consumed. She affirms that labor is necessary, and her focus is not on the fact that we as human beings have needs or that certain tasks require repetition, but rather she highlights the problem of when pretty much the entirety of human life becomes consumed by that laborious cycle. When we have very little time for freedom or any energy left to do what she calls work. Now, work, as she defines it, is the creation of something that is more lasting. Remember when I was saying that Sisyphus pushing the boulder uphill will not create something that has any longevity to it? That's essentially what Arendt is talking about here. It goes beyond the realm of biological necessity and enters the realm of fabrication. Work is that which we create that outlives the creator because it's intended to last and it's to be a contribution to a shared world. With work, there is a clear beginning and end to the process of creation. And so, unlike the cyclical nature of labor, work introduces a linear temporality. And this sort of leads into what she calls action. Action is where we participate within the world as distinct human beings rather than just workers and consumers, right? Action takes place within a web of human relationships where we're all acting and reacting to one another. Action creates and sustains the public sphere, the public realm. It's the space of appearance and where these individual beings can come together. We can deliberate, we shape our world, right? This is the realm of politics in the broadest sense. So whereas work was about creating and making things that contribute to a shared world, action is about what we do and say amongst others, including how we reveal who we are, how we participate in public life, and how we shape the world that we share together. German philosopher Karl Marx had a lot to say about class conflict, capitalism, and the material conditions shaping human life. He speaks to a reality that I mentioned earlier through his concept called alienation. Under alienated labor, you do not own what you produce. You may have little control over the process through which that thing is produced, and you may never see the person who ultimately benefits from your contributions, and rather than experiencing your work as an expression of your creativity or values or humanity, work begins to feel like something that is disconnected from you, something that you do because you have to in order to get what you need to survive, right? In alienation, you are a worker bee in a massive beehive operation, performing the same functions every day, but without any understanding of how your labor fits into the bigger picture. You may not feel heard or like your ideas matter, and your value feels like it's reduced to your productivity, your output, your efficiency, the ability to perform the tasks that are assigned to you. And while this typically isn't a problem temporarily, when it goes on too long, I think we begin to wonder, what's the point? And we struggle to find meaning or fulfillment in what we're doing. Now, in my experience on my journey, when I have reached the point of alienation, that was when I began experiencing feelings of depression. And during that time, I actually began reading this book about depression called Lost Connections by Johann Hari. Love it. I don't have it on this bookshelf. It is actually on my desk across the room, but it's something that I reread often. Anyway, in one of the chapters, he talks about disconnection from meaningful work as one of the forms of disconnection that can contribute to depression. And I felt so seen and so validated reading that book. Definitely highly recommend checking it out if you haven't. Byung-Chul Han takes this a step further in his book titled The Burnout Society. I love what he discusses in the book, where he points out that eventually, as a society, we have moved from what he calls a disciplinary society to an achievement society, shifting from an external discipline model of the whip to an internal model, having internalized the master's supervisor's voice. In the internal model of achievement society, we become both the master and the slave. We supervise ourselves. We judge ourselves. We compare ourselves. We feel guilty when we rest, and we're always asking ourselves if we've done enough. And then when we become exhausted, we interpret that exhaustion as a personal failure. We wonder where we went wrong, right? Were we disciplined enough? Were we motivated enough? Were we qualified? We tell ourselves that we just need a better morning routine, a better planner, a better mindset, a change in diet. You name it, we blame it. Rarely, or maybe not as rarely considering the times we're in, do you come across a person that pauses long enough to question whether or not spending the majority of our lives pushing a boulder that isn't ours toward a destination we did not choose is a quality of life for us. Like I said at the beginning of the video, y'all, there is certainly a growing chorus of us asking, what is it all for? We are like Barry Benson in the B movie, questioning the purpose and working a role, stuck in a cycle that we can never escape until we die.
But choose carefully, because you will stay in the job that you pick for the rest of your life.
The same job for the rest of your life? I didn't know that. So you'll just work us to death?
We'll sure try.
This, my friends, is where the Sisyphean experience can begin to brush up against nihilism. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of all that, and I know, I keep saying it's coming, and it's coming, but there's a method behind the madness. It's a slow burn, if you will, okay? This is the hearth, after all. Nihilism did not land on my radar as a strictly philosophical concept that I just came across in a book. As mentioned, I first began experiencing these feelings during my faith deconstruction journey. And I think sharing how that can happen helps us to understand why the question, what is it all for, can be so destabilizing, especially for someone who was raised within a religious framework that, you know, where that framework used to provide purpose and an explanation for nearly everything in life. So before I define nihilism, existentialism, or absurdism, let's just swing over there just for a little second, and then we'll circle back around and tie everything together.
Public service announcement, by the way. If you still haven't grabbed your cozy blanket, your favorite snack, your warm beverage, please feel free to pause the video. Okay, this is your own personal commercial potty break. And then come back, okay? You need that, okay? This is a lengthy one.
Oh, you still there? Oh, you good. Let's get back to it. Historically, religion has been a dominant factor in society. It has, and in many ways still is, a major force in shaping political, moral, and cultural life. If we consider the time of the Christian Crusades, which was from 1095 to around the late 15th, early 16th century, Christians aimed to retake control of the Holy Land from Islamic dominance. They wanted to conquer pagan areas and to recapture any formerly Christian territories. They were seen by many of their participants as a means of redemption and expiation for sins. The Crusades was a military operation, and it only began declining with the rise of Protestant Reformation and the decline in papal authority. So religion was calling the shots in a major way for a pretty long time. The winds began to shift during the 17th and 18th centuries, partly due to industrialization, secularization, and the scientific advances, which led to the rise of the Enlightenment period, where traditional authority was questioned and we started embracing reason and individual liberty. For Western civilization, this was a great time of cultural and intellectual flourishing, but for some, this shift paved the way for a crisis called nihilism. And why might this be? Why might this sort of shift contribute to a rise in nihilism? Notice I didn't say it created nihilism. I said it contributed to an increase in nihilism. Well, as I'm sure I've mentioned in some capacity in some of my other videos, crisis becomes inevitable when the foundations you've built your entire existence on begin fracturing and crumbling. Now, a crisis of faith, especially at the level of questioning the existence of God or ultimate reality, will almost certainly cause you to question your reason for being, your purpose, and what gives your life meaning, if not the God that you've grown accustomed to worshiping and serving. Side note, if you would like to learn a little bit more about how I define or understand the different levels or depths of faith deconstruction, where I do touch on getting to the depth of questioning God or ultimate reality, definitely check out this video here where I discuss that in detail, including what aspects of faith are actually in question. It's a good one, check it out. We have to remember that for many people of faith, and even within philosophical ways of living, there's ultimately rhyme or reason or purpose that is attached or gives meaning to our existence and our actions. Whether it be the Christian striving to secure a place in heaven, the Hindu attaining moksha, the Buddhists reaching nirvana, they all provide an end goal and thereby giving purpose to a person's life. By holding on to the idea that one's nature is sinful or that you need to be purified, fixed, that your experience of life needs to be escaped from or transcended, or that you're in need of salvation. This makes our every decision and the actions that we take have meaning. We're either working towards those goals or we're working against them. But when the reality or authority that introduced, defined, and supported those ideas come into question, so does the meaning and purpose that we associated with them. Okay, so now let's finally define existential nihilism. Existential nihilism is the belief that life has no objective meaning and that it is pointless to assign any meaning where there is none. It can be also the fear or belief that without a divine anchor, such as like a God or creator, life has no inherent value, truth, or purpose. Without God or some sort of divinity, the faithful tend to struggle to know or understand how to orient themselves because God provides that. God provides a compass for life and a foundation for external values and objective meaning. So you can imagine the sort of crisis of faith that some of the religious followers may have experienced during the rise of intellectualism and theological reformation. The Enlightenment period completely undermined the authority of the monarchy and religious officials, and it paved the way for the political revolutions of the 18th and 19th centuries. Whereas it was once considered taboo or even life-threatening to question religious authority, which by extension meant to question God, now it was more socially acceptable to not only question it, but to reject it altogether. Why rely so heavily on belief when we now have the scientific method, reason, and experimentation to provide something more tangible and definite? The experience of nihilism brought with it conversations about how to deal with it. Two very popular philosophical views, existentialism and absurdism. Existentialism is associated with several 19th and 20th century European philosophers, but the term itself wasn't coined until like the mid 20th century. It speaks to the problematic nature of human existence that I referred to earlier, the conflict between the human desire for meaning and the universe's silence or life's silence in response to this desire. The existentialists would agree with the nihilists that life has no objective meaning and that we aren't born with a predetermined purpose. But they would emphasize that we as individuals are responsible for exercising the freedom to create our own meaning through our choices and our actions, despite life having no inherent meaning of its own. And then you have absurdism, which also agrees that life is devoid of inherent meaning and boldly highlights the absurdity that humans have this involuntary desire for meaning, yet life or the universe refuses to provide or confirm such meaning. But what makes absurdism different from nihilism and existentialism is that it challenges you to sort of hold the uncomfortableness, to hold the tension open. It challenges you to keep desiring meaning, because you can't help but to, while consciously admitting that life gives you no meaning, and to live in revolt rebel against the absurd rather than denying its existence or pretending to solve it. To the absurdist, the nihilist gives up too easily, and the existentialist cheats by pretending to invent meaning to fill that void. So, now that we have explored nihilism, existentialism, and absurdism, I want to return to the question at the heart of this video. Why does modern life feel so Sisyphean? Now, we've ruled out the fallacy that humans are just lazy, don't want to work hard, or are incapable of finding meaning in repetitive or difficult tasks. Not true, right? Hannah Arendt's labor definition speaks to that. We've established that humans will sacrifice, study, build, create, right? Care for others and endure hardship when we can see how our effort connects to something bigger or something meaningful. What makes an experience feel Sisyphean is when the labor becomes disconnected from purpose, agency, and any lasting sense of progress. When we repeatedly give our time and energy to something that we did not freely choose, agency, cannot meaningfully influence, and may never see completed or to come to completion, there is alienation and lack of long-term incentive. It's the perpetual cycle of working to survive so that we can continue surviving to work. Now, when a person begins to feel depressed, anxious, burnt out, disconnected, or unable to continue carrying the weight of that cycle, when they can no longer push the boulder, how do we understand what's happening to them? Do we look at the environment and ask whether the conditions themselves are unhealthy? Or do we immediately look inside the person and ask what needs to be fixed? Majority of the time, it's the latter. There's an emerging conversation sometimes referred to as the therapeutic turn, which broadly speaks to the increasing influence of psychological and therapeutic language in how we understand ourselves, our relationships, and the problems we experience. There's a question I think worth asking about what happens when social, economic, and political problems are treated primarily as individual psychological problems. Hear me out. What happens when a person is anxious because their employment is unstable, their rent continues to rise, they have no savings, and one unexpected expense can completely derail their life? Yet, the only response offered to them is learning how to better regulate their anxiety. What happens when a person is depressed because they feel alienated from their work, disconnected from their community, unable to imagine a future beyond working and paying bills, but the focus remains entirely on correcting something within the individual? What happens when someone becomes exhausted because they're overworked, underpaid, and they're carrying more responsibilities than one human being can reasonably sustain, but their exhaustion is interpreted as poor time management, lack of motivation, or failure to establish a good enough morning routine? Are we treating the source of the distress, or are we helping people become functional enough to remain inside the very environments producing the stress? Don't get me wrong, y'all. I'm not saying that coping skills are useless, because hello, I have plenty of self-help. I get it. You know, sometimes the intentional breathing will most certainly help you get through the day, right? Sometimes therapy gives you the language and the support and the clarity that you have needed to recognize the situation you're in and the headspace that you're in. And sometimes medication gives you just enough stability to begin making the kind of changes that you really want to see, right? It gives you what you need, the energy and the clarity that you would not have otherwise been able to obtain on your own. So let me make it very clear. None of those are the problem, okay? But imagine utilizing all of these things with someone's foot still on your neck, right? The symptoms of the foot being on the neck is being managed, whereas the actual problem, the foot being on the neck, goes unaddressed. That's a problem. This is where I think Byung-Chul Han's description of the achievement society becomes especially important. If we have internalized the whip, right? If we have become both the master and the slave, then it becomes insidiously, increasingly difficult to identify where the pressure is actually coming from. We experience ourselves as free because no one is physically standing over us, forcing us to keep going. The physical whip is gone, right? We tell ourselves that we're pursuing our own goals, we're maximizing our own potential, and choosing to become the best versions of ourselves. But when we can no longer keep up, we rarely ask, are these expectations unreasonable? No. We tend to look inward first, assuming that something must be wrong with us because Bill is doing it, Keisha got it. We tell ourselves we need to be more disciplined, more productive, more resilient. We need to fix our limiting beliefs. We need to optimize our schedules. The list goes on, right? But the insidious part is that because the master's voice is now coming from inside the house, right? It's coming from inside of us. There's no clear person standing outside of us to hold accountable or responsible for the pressure that we're feeling. Dr. Gabor Maté explores something similar in his book, The Myth of Normal. I do have that one right here, where he highlights that just because something is common or popular doesn't mean that it is healthy. Also, you have social psychologist Erich Fromm. He also speaks to this in chapter 2 of his book, The Sane Society, where he says, the fact that millions of people share the same vices does not make these vices virtues. The fact that they share so many errors does not make the errors to be truths. And the fact that millions of people share the same forms of mental pathology does not make these people sane. So when a harmful pattern is shared by enough people, we stop recognizing it as harmful. We may even rename it as discipline, ambition, maturity, professionalism, resilience, grit, right? And that's not to mention the racial dimensions that deepen this conversation even further, because ideas about who is even considered normal, sane, or productive, or well-adjusted have never been applied equally. For Black people and other marginalized groups, adapting to society has always meant learning to function within conditions that were never designed for our well-being in mind anyway. But that's another layer. I won't go into that today. Not today. This video is probably getting long enough already. So I'm going to hold some restraint. But let's continue. Perhaps some of what we call dysfunction is not always a person failing to adjust properly to life. Maybe the person is appropriately responding to conditions that do not adequately support or cultivate thriving or human flourishing. This leaves us with a very uncomfortable question. If a person seeks help and relief from the pressure and stress of Sisyphean life, is the goal to help them examine why the boulder is there? Is it to help them determine whether the boulder belongs to them? Is it to help them imagine a life in which they are no longer required to push the boulder? Or is the goal simply to teach them a healthier posture so that they can push the boulder without hurting their back? It would seem to me like the relief the person would need will require both personal care and systemic change, whatever that looks like. None of this happens in a vacuum, right? So I won't pretend that every form of suffering can be explained by capitalism, modernity, trauma, or unhealthy work environments, because human distress is layered, it's complicated, right? Biology matters, personal history, the relationships that people have, right? The choices we make, yada, yada. We know that, right? But environment matters too. I think when you have a massively growing amount of people talking about how exhausted, disconnected, or anxious they are, we owe it to ourselves to at least consider whether we're looking at millions of isolated personal failures or if we're seeing reasonable and natural responses to something unhealthy that has been normalized. All right, Hearth folk, that's all I have for you today, but I want to hear from you. Has modern life felt Sisyphean to you lately? What are your thoughts about Byung-Chul Han's Burnout Society? Are you familiar with the works of Karl Marx, Johann Hari, or Hannah Arendt? Have you ever found yourself struggling with moments of nihilism, existentialism, or absurdism? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. Please don't be shy. We aren't know-it-alls over here, but we might be learn-it-alls, okay? So we're all learning, we're all exploring, and reflecting on this topic. So anyway, y'all, thanks so much for watching this video and for spending some time at the hearth, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.